Nobody knows how it's being applied yet or how it will be applied. So it's still very early days. We have actually two roles inside of Cayosoft. It's probably a trade secret I shouldn't be giving out, but I'm pretty transparent about how we run the business. So we have an AI architect on the business side, evaluating each part of our business to figure out just how we can apply it and make people's lives better, and not get ourselves into a situation where we've hired 500 people and then all of a sudden AI shows up and, oh my God, it eliminated 50%, right? We don't want to ever be in that situation. So we've kind of what I consider taking the bull by the horns and trying to look at how we can automate our existing business processes so we can grow into AI, not have this revolution with AI, but rather make it an evolution with AI.
Welcome to Petri Dish, the podcast for system administrators and engineers who are working with Microsoft technologies. Today, I'm very happy to say that I've got a guest with us, Bob Bobel, who's CEO and founder of Cayosoft. So welcome, Bob. How are you doing today?
Russell, thank you so much for having me. I'm doing very well this morning.
I read recently that organizations are looking at using multiple identity providers to prevent lock-in and to choose whichever provider is best suited to a particular task. Now, of course, that can increase complexity as well for an organization. So I wondered, what do you think is the best way for IT teams to manage identity?
Yeah, it's interesting. Regardless of all the new identity platforms out there, right, that are focused more on web, 70-80% are still looking back and using their traditional Active Directory environment as their primary authentication mechanism. Microsoft itself has extended that to the cloud to Entra ID. And so even they have two, right? They have the legacy on-premise component, and then they have their cloud-based solution. And the two work pretty harmoniously together. Then you have all sorts of other folks that are what I call gap fillers or filling in the gaps. And those could be the legacy identity management systems. And those are typically larger companies that are looking at legacy mainframes or other types of applications that they're worried about provisioning or controlling. And then you have other folks that are more concerned about cloud and SSO. Microsoft does a pretty good job there, I would say, but they're not perfect. And if you have to connect your WordPress site to your help desk site, et cetera, there are third-party solutions out there. Stavicity is one of them that makes a great addition to whatever core identity systems you're already running. And I believe that's going to be the way it is for a while. Microsoft can't be everywhere. I'm a Microsoft guy. I never worked for Microsoft, but I've made my career building solutions and securing that environment or that stack of products. But I see this as being sort of the new norm, the new standard, and I don't see it getting a lot more complex from where we are today. But certainly, as things change, as technology improves, I think we have some opportunity to maybe do a little consolidation over the next, maybe 2 years or so.
So it doesn't seem to me that it's a very difficult task to create a user in Active Directory. Yeah, it's relatively straightforward.
It's extremely straightforward. Yeah, that's part of the problem. It seems too easy, and people sometimes don't realize at scale. It's very easy to make mistakes.
So what are the biggest problems that organizations face with provisioning users and I guess also deprovisioning them?
Well, I think first and foremost, native tools are designed to work across a wide variety of environments. So when I say native tools, I mean the Microsoft tools that ship with Windows Server, Active Directory, or with your Azure console. And so they're concerned about making sure it works for a company that has 100 employees, or a company that has 1,000 employees, or 10,000, or 100,000. It just has to work and not cause support problems, basically. You can imagine, though, manually creating 10,000 accounts. If I'm 100,000 or a million user environment, which there are quite a few of, you'd be surprised at how many there are. And I have 1 to 5% turnover rate in my organization. And it costs me, $30 to $50 for every user I have to provision, or in most cases, more importantly, deprovision, right? When you have to make sure those accounts are locked down if somebody is separated from the organization. And then it takes, anywhere between an hour to 5 hours. And in some of these really large organizations where there are multiple applications that are tied together to get somebody to a point where they can do their job, it could take a week. And so that's lost productivity as well. And so, at scale, the larger you get, the less those native tools perform. And honestly, it's a pyramid, right? And I don't mean a pyramid scheme. What I mean by that is that I think the largest environments, there are many fewer of them at the top. And then as you go down into small business, there are millions of those organizations. And so, that sweet spot is somewhere in the mid-market size range. So anywhere between, I would say, 10 employees to maybe 500 or 700 employees. That's where it really tends to work okay for them. They're not overburdened with busy work, and the error rate or the mistake rate is probably low enough that they can get away with it. And there are 3 people there, and they're going to correct it as soon as they find the mistake. But at scale, it becomes impossible. You need solutions. You need an identity platform, or you need to invest in scripting. I don't personally recommend that, but I mean that is definitely one of the ways people solve the problem. And it's a matter of scale. And that's one of the 3 major things that we do, is try to help people scale that up. We only do Microsoft. We don't do mainframes, and we're not doing your AS400s. I'm probably showing my age there. Maybe the lack of hair is showing my age as well. But we're concentrating on making sure that your on-premise accounts are done and created correctly. That you don't have to wait an hour for the sync tool to create the cloud account. The licenses are set correctly. We even get down to, if you're provisioning a mailbox, does the button do reply or reply all, right? A lot of organizations don't like reply all because it tends to have unintended consequences. Somebody hits reply all, and lots of people hear some embarrassing story or whatever they put in. But it is definitely one of those things where you need that fine-grained control around provisioning to automate. And it's interesting because as the global economy shifts, goes positive or negative, every week there's some different story happening around the world. IT efficiency is the one thing that, whether you're in a good time or negative economic time, it's always needed. It's always wanted. Right now, we have a lot of people asking us, how do I do more with less? Because we're facing an uncertain economic situation. And, for us, it's always, for the good news for us, I should say, as a company, is that it's a good investment. It's not that you're going to fire a bunch of IT guys because you've automated, user provisioning or day-to-day tasks, group management, for example. It's typically that you are able to cope with the volume you currently have, that you've already been asked to do a lot more with less, and invest the folks' time that are there, your existing staff's time, and maybe more important things, making sure you don't have outages, for example.
So you mentioned scripting there, and you said that you don't really recommend creating a homebrew solution to solve a particular problem using scripting, but I wonder, why not?
Well, this is one of those things that I'm going to give you a little bit of background first. There was a chap named Jeffrey Snover who now works for Google. I met Jeffrey when he was a senior fellow at Microsoft, and he had created a scripting language called Monad, which eventually became PowerShell. That technology is and was fantastic, and I've been involved with several projects, including one in partnership with Microsoft to develop management commandlets for Active Directory on-premise before the Windows Server team or the Active Directory team could get to it. So we actually built a set of commands that were very, very popular at the time. We call them the QAD commands. So I am the first person to say scripting is a fantastic alternative for small scale automation. And there are other things out there now, Power BI, and some of the scripting things that are available there. But I also temper that with the fact that on a monthly basis, we have people coming to us saying, hey, my PowerShell guru, and insert what happened, right? So was fired, died, or retired. We have all those. And now I have a million lines of PowerShell that we're not sure was written properly in the first place because the person wasn't a coder. They kind of learned it as they went and really got into it. But, programmers, they do testing. We have a whole separate testing team, right? Just to check them because, when you're working on your own script, it is very clear in your mind how it's supposed to work, not how it actually works. And so finding bugs and scaling and those types of things are often never considered. And if all that's wrapped into one person's brain and they leave the organization, now all of a sudden the organization is at a disadvantage. So for smaller scale automation, I think it's the best thing. I think it's perfect. Writing an application, I don't think is appropriate. Simply because it puts your environment at risk. When we started Cayosoft, one of the very first things we did was we did automated license assignment. And it was a direct result of several really large organizations scripting license assignment in Office 365, not understanding the assignment order of licensing was critical. And what would happen is they would unassign licenses accidentally to everybody in their environment. And that error then would cause a situation where they couldn't reassign the license. And so overnight, everybody would lose their mailboxes, right? So that was one of the very, very first things that got us started because we understood how it was to be done. And we saw that as an opportunity. And honestly, I started this company on my 401k. I didn't have a backer. I'm not rich. And so, we were looking for things that we could do to solve real world problems. And that was one of the first ones we got. And so just from experience, I will say PowerShell is a fantastic tool. If you know it, be blessed that you know it, because I think it's a great experience. Office 365, Azure switched to Graph, does have some PowerShell. Microsoft just deprecated the Microsoft Online Commands for PowerShell. And so you really need to transition to Graph. And learn the Graph scripting language or the Graph query language, and use some tools out there. It's a whole different world. We're actually working on AI to help us deal with Graph because it's not like LDAP, which, most of the folks of my generation, the graybeards we call them, right? Because they're older, would be familiar with. And it's kind of going by the wayside. But definitely if you're investing your time, I would invest in learning Graph and how to query Graph. Rather than maybe necessarily going out and learning, hardcore PowerShell. And you can use PowerShell to query Graph. We have a free Graph PowerShell command set that you can get off of Microsoft's PowerShell gallery. It's called Cayosoft CEO. And you can use PowerShell to query Graph. It's a fantastic little free tool. So just a little plug there for our freeware.
I think after Microsoft 365, PowerShell is probably one of the most popular topics that we write about on Petri. I guess because IT pros, they like to get their hands dirty and to do something creative, to create a solution themselves for their organization and maybe help them to reduce costs. But you said that that's probably not necessarily such a good idea, necessarily.
Yeah, I think I think it has to be used like any tool, right? If I need to cut a piece of lumber, I'm not going to use my hammer to do that, right? That's sort of the analogy I would use. And I think PowerShell is the same way. I think targeted automations, targeted situations where I don't want to take the chance of making a mistake on the keyboard. And so I want to, have a script that's going to put settings in or check settings. But as we move to cloud, there's I think a lower visibility that we have on those back-end systems. And I think the API access is probably extensive in Graph, but less so in PowerShell. And so it's a compromise, right? You have to figure out what the best tool is for whatever task that you're trying to complete. From an IT leader perspective, if I was a director of IT or manager of IT, I would think very long and hard before I would build my own solution. For all those things I mentioned. Even with AI coming on board, I think the rationalization that people are saying is, hey, AI is not going to replace programmers. It'll make them 10x more productive. And that's what we're seeing. Some of the things that would take time to research and things are much simpler to find and get built with AI, and that's sort of the revolution we see going on right now. And I think it's true too, also with PowerShell. There are very, very good prompts you can use to generate the PowerShell script, or the C script that you need, or graph script that you might need to get things done.
Talk there a little bit about artificial intelligence and some of the features that you developed from the get-go. So was that Cayosoft Administrator that you were talking about,
Yeah.
that
So
product?
so for full disclosure, my business partner and I, for 10 years, were at Quest Software. And we had joined them through an acquisition. We were both with a company called Ileta. Shout out to anybody who used to be an Ileta employee. We love and miss you. Unless you're working for us again, because we have, I don't know, 30% of our staff are former Ileta guys. Started by Ratmir Timoshev, Andrei Baranov, and another Andrei, who went on after that to create Veeam software. So very successful lineage of businesses that they've started and really radically changed the market. We like to think we have a little bit of that DNA. And so we started with no intent on building an administration system. We were building a policy enforcement tool. And people sort of naturally, we let the market guide us, and they were asking for features, and it just pushed us down this administrator route. And we had a lot of experience because we'd built the Active Role Server and Enterprise Directory Manager products for Elite and Quest, along with, 8 other products that I was responsible for there at the time. And so as we progressed, people said, hey, it'd be really great if you could do this and that. And we're like, yeah, we know how to do this. So we built it. And it was based on PowerShell, by the way. And so it becomes a very sort of seamless transition for folks that might have been on a on-premise only tool like the Manage Engine tool or the Quest tool. Pretty easy to move off of those. We were a little lucky because we didn't have a bunch of customers that, had we gone and started messing with the product, we would have screwed up. So we were able to start from scratch. And the number one rule that we had was it had to be platform agnostic in terms of whether it was on-premise or cloud. And so we built hybrid to begin with. In 2019, we realized that we had a lot of requests around change auditing, maybe doing it a little different, integrating it a little bit better with rollbacks so you could get rid of unwanted changes. And then, frankly, we realized that was a tough sell if you didn't also do forest recovery. And so that was our second product, called Cayosoft Guardian. And Cayosoft Guardian, I think, is the game changer in the industry for us. I think that's where we see the most interest, net new interest coming. And it directly addresses what happens when you get nailed with ransomware or malware. And, today it's a 2-month-long exercise to recover not just Active Directory, but your entire environment, maybe 3 or 4 days, typically, with Active Directory and Entra. We do that instantly. We have a way that we do a fault tolerance called a standby directory. So every night we create a clone of your forest in Azure or in AWS. And when you get hit, you shut off your machine so that your forensic folks are going to be happy that you haven't been tampering with those machines that were now either ransomware hit, or if the malware has just taken them out, they're dead. You just shut them off. Change your router and you're back in business. We also integrate threat detection and cleansing tools to make sure that if there was something that got through, that doesn't reinfect the environment. So this is a big change over traditional backup tools because they do server-based backup, which takes the malware with it. Yep. And the legacy tools from other vendors that, while they do a cleaner backup, you still have to stand up a bunch of hardware, which takes a couple days. So when I think people are pleasantly surprised when they go to look at our forest recovery tool, they can do it in an afternoon to test it and proof of concept it. Everybody else takes 3 or 4 days, and they want to do it in a lab. They're afraid to do it in production, and we have a very clean approach. But those are the 2 products we do.
So if I understood correctly, you mentioned both products there. So Caresoft Forest Guardian is essentially simplifying the restore process. So, of course, if you were to look at the manual process for restoring Active Directory, that can be quite complex, especially if you have, of course, more than one domain controller, which, I guess most organizations ought to have. And then you've got the administrator product, which is essentially replacing many different local consoles, the native tools that Microsoft provides, and bringing everything into one window, if you like. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we replaced 14 or 15 native consoles with administrator, consolidate that down into a single pane of glass. And with Guardian, I'm not gonna use the name of the competitor, but I believe we replaced 12 separate installable applications, like large enterprise applications, with one install of Guardian.
Right.
We are subscription. We don't offer SaaS yet. That's something on our roadmap for this year. We do have a freemium tool, so I encourage anybody to download and give those a trial. But for us, it was because we started this with my 401k, and I didn't have a massive 401k. We just didn't have the resources to go off and try to do a patchwork of different applications targeting different things. So we really re-envisioned what a modern management solution would look like, and we concentrated on three big areas: managing, which is the administrator solution; monitoring, which is monitoring for changes, not just with Active Directory or Entra, but also with team security policies. I mean, we do a lot beyond just those things. And we realize that when an unwanted change happens, whether it's malicious or just a mistake, you need to roll those back instantly. And then we have our final one, which is the recovery area. And those are really the three big buckets that IT teams need help with. And when we talk modern, we talk about consolidating those down into 2 installs. Hopefully one day it'll be 1 install or 1 SaaS subscription that you get. We're on that track. And not having to have separate applications built by 15 companies that I've assembled because I needed to give my salespeople something extra to sell, right? So, and when you do that, suddenly you have a single security model across the apps or across the functional areas, and a single interface for people to learn. And it makes it much simpler for the IT team to deal with it. So as you bring more people in to use those applications, the training is more consistent, it's easier, it's faster, and the chances they're going to make a mistake are almost zero now.
So Active Directory, of course, is a complex product with lots of different components, and it was designed from the get-go to scale for very large enterprises that are potentially geographically dispersed all over the world. So Microsoft might argue that the reason it's complex is because it needs to be able to scale. But from what I understood with Cayosoft products, that they've been engineered to essentially be as simple as possible. So you have this one product that's also able to scale to manage something very complex like Active Directory that can be scaled to an enterprise that covers the entire globe. And this is a well-engineered product that simplifies the complexity of the administration of a very complex system like Active Directory, if I'm understanding correctly.
That's absolutely the case. And
Right.
I will say it's the people here at Cayosoft. I did a shout out to Ilita. We have a lot of those good folks here. But I think it's more that over the past 25 years, as we've been building these solutions, remember, I mentioned I was old, now I'm proving it, right? And seeing where we did a great job in the past, and where we thought we could do big improvements. I think that perspective is what drove that, and the need to be efficient, not just for us internally with development and testing and those types of things, but also we wanted to make our customers more efficient. We do have a lot of customers that do not have on-premise Active Directory. They're just using us to manage Entra ID and Office 365. And there is a size environment, probably that 700 user environment that below we see probably don't need on-premise Active Directory unless you have some older apps that maybe haven't moved to cloud. And above that, you're probably in hybrid mode. And we work equally well in both environments. When you get down to 50 employees, probably not good fit. Honestly, you're probably going to want to use native tools because of the cost, and it is another application in your environment, right? And if you don't need it, don't put it in, right? So I'm not saying it's work for everybody.
Right.
But we enjoy a 98.5 or 98.7, some crazy customer retention rate. And that's not over the past trailing 12 months. That's over the past 5 years. So if I come off a little, hey, we got great tools. When we get customers, we keep them because we really are trying to be equitable with our customers. We're not trying to price gouge them. We're trying to improve things. And we believe that putting out the best product and trying to look out for your customer is the best way to get new customers. And we had to do that because we didn't have the $1 billion in marketing that every one of our competitors now has. And we're growing like crazy. Q1 of this year was our best quarter ever. And, I think we're going to have the same results Q2, 3, 4. So for us, it is desperately important that when customers look at our solution and we gain a customer, that we do everything to earn their trust and respect every day, not just when it comes time to renew our subscription.
Okay, that's great to hear. Let's talk a little bit about artificial intelligence. How do you see AI affecting the identity and access and management space, if at all? I guess it will because it's touching every other space.
The first thing I see is that nobody knows how it's being applied yet or how it will be applied. So it's still very early days. We have actually 2 roles inside of Cayosoft. This is probably a trade secret I shouldn't be giving out, but I'm pretty transparent about how we run the business. So we have an AI architect on the business side, evaluating each part of our business to figure out just how we can apply it and make people's lives better, and not get ourselves into a situation where we've hired 500 people and then all of a sudden AI shows up and, oh my God, it eliminated 50%, right? We don't want to ever be in that situation. So we've kind of what I consider taking the bull by the horns and trying to look at how we can automate our existing business processes so we can grow into AI, not have this revolution with AI, but rather make it an evolution with AI. And on the development side, we have development resources assigned to both helping developers and also integrating into product, right? I mean, as you would. I'm going to talk less about that because we haven't really announced anything. But what I see right this second is that there are a lot of concepts that people just didn't fully understand about AI, or they had questions. AI becomes a fantastic tutor. So if you have a question about, what is, multi-factor authentication versus 2-factor authentication, hint, there's not much difference. But if you're not sure, you can ask AI and it will give you an answer. And if that answer doesn't make sense, you can ask it to clarify and it will start to drill down on those things. So we see it first and foremost as helping people understand and get faster times to resolutions and maybe better resolutions, things that they didn't know in the past. We are working on some resources for people, for the community, and we're happy to share that with Petri. Might be helpful around AI to sort of guide people in how they can use it, in particular, something like a ChatGPT or a Copilot in regards to identity management and managing identity. So stay tuned on that one. That's going to be a free resource that I would love to share through Petri. I think it'd be a great opportunity for that community or for your community to pick those up. And I think there will be a little bit of a revolution in terms of functionality of product. I mentioned graph queries, right? Imagine having to create a graph query, or I saw the Intune team, they have a proprietary query language to go out and find devices in your environment. It's not simple to learn for complex queries. The AI built the query now, right? And then you check it, make sure it's what you want, and then you test it. I think that'll be the first line of where we see maybe the little bit of revolution happening. But people are growing into it, which is, I think, the appropriate thing to do. I don't think it's going to eliminate anybody's job anytime soon. I think it's like having an extra pair of hands, right? Everybody could use an assistant. I think you now have a great opportunity to pick up an assistant at a very good price point.
Okay, that's fantastic. So people can go over to cayosoft.com to find out more about Guardian and Administrator and some of the free resources that you mentioned.
There is a link for free tools on, I think it's the product menu. I can't remember. We also have a fairly big announcement in 2025 later in 2025 around expanding our free solution. So, 2025 is going to be a pretty big year for that for us. We really want to help the community expand its ability, not only around AI, but also to defend against the ongoing threat of malware and ransomware that every day is in the news, shutting down emergency rooms, putting universities out of business. I'm in Columbus, Ohio. It's actually Westerville, Ohio. City of Columbus got hit with a ransomware attack, and the ramifications of that are still being felt. And so we realize that we have an obligation with our solution to help people avoid those things. And so stay tuned. We'll have a good 2025 offering, I think, in our free solutions category to help people target better security so that they don't become victims to ransomware or malware.
Okay, thanks, Bob, very much for your time. It was a really interesting conversation.
Russell, good to talk to you. Thanks so much for having me. Have a great afternoon.
Okay, and thanks everybody for watching this episode of Petri Dish, and we'll see you next time.